Nice to be back. I've got a couple of paragraphs in German, but I think I'm going to dive in English. But if you want me to prove that I can speak German, I'm very happy to do that. It is really special to be back here. I have to say this auf Deutsch. Lieber Herr Dr. Wenzler, this is eine große Ehre. Professor Schmidt, Professor Koenig, Andreas, for you. I'm still trying to figure out this organization, but it sounds terrific. David Zeller from the American Club in Hamburg. My colleague, please stand with our Generalkonsulin Inmi Patterson. Ein bisschen auf Deutsch. Ich freue mich sehr, wieder in Hamburg und an der Bucerius Law School zu sein. Ich möchte keinen typischen Vortrag über das halten, was Deutsche an den Vereinigten Staaten nicht verstehen. Also machen Sie sich keine Sorgen wegen des Quiz. Haben Sie das Quiz auf Ihren Stühlen? Sie müssen die Antworten auf dem Weg nach draußen nicht abgeben. Und es werden auch keine Noten vergeben. Zum Quiz komme ich aber später noch. This is, I believe, the only institution, at least outside of Berlin in Germany, that I have visited twice. I was honored to be here in December of 2009 at a town hall, meeting with students, and I am thrilled to be back today. Now, at one level, you could read the subject of my remarks and suggest that I'm going to spend my time talking about the differences between our two countries. But I also want to talk about today the things that we have in common. But before I do, I want to thank you for your very, very moving and kind words about our colleague Chris Stevens and his three colleagues who died so tragically last week. Really, on behalf of all of us in our diplomatic corps, those are deeply felt words. I appreciate everyone's support. The outpouring of support and solidarity in Germany was overwhelming, and it continues to be. So thank you for that. So last year, December of 2009, I arrived as ambassador in August of 2009. Over those 3 years plus, and many, many town hall meetings later, I am back here to continue a discussion with you. And since, in case you haven't noticed, we are in the middle of an election in my country, I will frame at least part of what I have to say around the current campaign. As I said, there is so much that Germans and Americans have in common. We share the same strong convictions about the core values that define our countries. Values like freedom, tolerance, and democracy. Our relationship has been formed by centuries of immigration and trade. The past 6.5 decades of world history have shaped that relationship into a partnership that is global in scope and responsibility. We are so close and know each other so well. Nevertheless, there are some things that we just don't seem to get, and that goes for both Americans and Germans. Here on this side of the Atlantic, that sentiment often translates into headlines like, "Die Amis, die spinnen." That was actually the headline from an excerpt from a recent book by my friend Christoph von Marschall on American politics. And in fact, Christoph and I have sat together on panels to discuss the question of who is more difficult to understand, Amis or Germans. And that conversation is also one that I'd like to continue today, unfortunately, without Christoph, although I understand that he spoke recently, without me, I might add, on a similar topic at the American Sentinel. I would describe myself as both a news and political junkie. Or I always like to say that I'm a political gym rat, which is ein besonderer Phrase of English. But here in the presence of scholars, I'm going to begin my remarks as I did when I gave a similar speech last January at the American Academy in Berlin with a short discussion of a treatise written almost 200 years ago. This may indeed be one of the first things that Germans don't understand about Americans. Why does Alexis de Tocqueville, in his work Democracy in America, written by a French aristocrat almost 200 years ago, still mean so much to us? Well, one reason is probably that Tocqueville liked us. In contrast to the prevailing opinions of many in 19th century Europe. According to Leo Damrosch, a modern-day Tocqueville scholar from my alma mater, Harvard University, many Europeans thought Americans were, and I quote from Dr. Damrosch's research, provincial bores, violent, obsessed with money, and constantly spitting dirty brown tobacco juice. End of quote. As you might observe, apart from the bit about the tobacco juice, some folks may still agree with his analysis. But Tocqueville wrote about other aspects of America that also continue to resonate. The 4 decades after the French Revolution had been defined by political turbulence in many parts of Europe. There was still an uneasy tension between absolute monarchies and more democratic forms of government. In America, Tocqueville saw a model for Europe's future in the bold American experiment. During the course of his travels through 17 of the then 24 states, he discovered that implicit in the concepts of equality and freedom that defined America was a belief, indeed a passion, about the potential the future could bring. These concepts influenced America's judicial, economic, educational, and religious systems. They have been progressively institutionalized, internalized, and also sometimes distorted. And to be honest, sometimes the principles of equality and the economic, religious, and cultural freedoms that are America's greatest strengths are also its most notable vulnerabilities. Why? I'd like to think that perhaps we have set such a high standard for ourselves. Tocqueville was certainly not blind to some of the defects of American democracy. Women were not thought to have any role in political life, and slavery and racism were the uninvited guests at democracy's seemingly so bountiful table. But America has always been a work in progress. As President Barack Obama often says, we try to perfect a better union each and every day. It has taken centuries, but circles of opportunity have been expanded that have indeed made it possible for hard work and responsibility to be rewarded no matter where people come from, or what color their skin is, or what their religious beliefs may be. There is a basic premise in American society: if you work hard and you play by the rules, you will prosper. If you innovate, if you create and build, there is no limit on what you can achieve. There was a study done last year by Pew Research. If you don't know Pew Research, you should look it up. PEW. It's one of the foremost polling and research organizations in America. And they did a study, not just in America, but across many other countries in Europe. And in that, in answer to one of the questions, almost 2/3 of all Americans disagreed with the statement, quote, "Success in life is determined by forces outside their control." So to be specific, 62% of Americans disagreed with that statement. 72% of Germans agreed with that statement. It's an extraordinary, think about that. Again, success in life is determined by forces outside their control. 62% of Americans disagree. 72% of Germans agree with them. They asked one more I should highlight. Pick one. Freedom to pursue life's goals without state interference, or the state guarantees that nobody is in need. You got that? So, freedom to pursue life's goals without state interference, or the state guarantees nobody is in need. On the former, no interference, 58% of Americans agreed, 36% of the Germans agreed. On the latter, again, the state guarantees that nobody's in need, 35% of Americans supported that statement. 62% of Germans did. This facet of American political life is what makes the discussion, for example, about health care reform so complex. Germans have quite different perspectives on the responsibilities of individuals vis-a-vis the responsibilities of government. It's one more reason why they wonder what's wrong with those Amis. Very often people, especially young people, at town hall meetings call me on this premise. Mr. Ambassador, they ask, does the American dream, or der amerikanische Traum, still exist? Aren't Americans overly and unrealistically optimistic? I answer, because I believe it, optimism is in our DNA. It's part of who we Americans are, I think, as people. And optimism is also, by the way, an integral part of the discussion and debates that are a part of this election campaign. For example, economic momentum is an important element of how society works in the United States. During this election year, Americans are talking a lot about what course the government can and should take to address the challenges we face, and also how much the government can and should do to help citizens. For the most part, in any election, and notwithstanding the chaos and tragedy of last week, the issues that matter most this year are domestic. This year, as in many election years gone by, the economy is definitely the number one issue. There's that famous statement from one of Bill Clinton's advisors in 1992 said, "It's the economy, it's stupid." A lot of Americans are not happy about their situation in life, and who could blame them? The unemployment rate is high. Too many homes are worth less than the debt incurred to buy them. These are the realities that the American voters are rightfully concerned about. And American voters are looking for real answers from the two major candidates on how we move forward. But let's not forget that this is an election. One of my favorite quotations about the political process is from Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York and the father of New York's current governor. He said, and I quote, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose." 4 years ago, many people were attracted in an emotional and poetic way to Barack Obama. Some say that President Obama has not come through on the message of hope and change that he communicated 4 years ago. But like all figures in public office, he has had to accept that when in office, governing is one step in front of the other. And I believe, and admittedly, I am biased, he has accomplished an enormous amount. Those, I believe, who are the most disappointed in President Obama are perhaps the poets among us. Germany is, of course, das Land der Dichter und Denker. Nevertheless, here in Germany, President Obama continues to receive a measure of public approval that any politician would be very, very happy about, particularly in times like these. There was a poll taken last week among Germans. If Germans could vote for the President of the United States, President Obama won 86-7. Those are numbers either candidate would love to have in Ohio at the moment. This is a very, very tough time, I think, anywhere to govern. It's tough times for the umps and abba, particularly in a challenging global economic environment. I believe history will show just how unique the past decade has been. The bursting of an economic bubble, global economic challenge, September 11th, two of the longest and most expensive wars that the United States has ever fought. Each of these challenges in itself has unique and serious consequences. And when it comes to the economy, there is no doubt that the prescriptions that Governor Romney and President Obama offer for America's future are very different. This is not an election where you say, gosh, one of these guys is just a little bit off from the other. This year, American voters have a very real choice. And this is reflected, by the way, in the very tight polls that we've seen throughout the past 6 months. Both strategies represent a different interpretation of how the American dream can work in today's America. The Republican approach, to sum it up, is that the more government can stay out of the way of entrepreneurs, i.e. less regulation, less taxes, the more they will succeed. And when they do well and their businesses expand and they hire more people, all Americans will, by extension, have more opportunities to succeed. The Democrats are offering a middle-class first policy. Their theory is that, and I have to say this is the school of thought that I've grown up in, that if things go well for the middle class, things will go well for America, including for its very most wealthiest. For America's less fortunate citizens, the dream of a better life most often means becoming a part of the middle class. Census figures show that all American workers slid backward in the past few years as a result of the financial crisis and recession. Median income fell by over 6% between 2007 and 2010. But the drop was even greater for both African Americans and Latinos. Considering also that overall in 2010, income for blacks and Latinos remained considerably lower than the median American income, in the range, I might add, of 30 to 40% lower, you might expect that they would be discouraged. Polls suggest, however, that this is not true. 3 out of 5 working-class blacks and Latinos say they haven't yet achieved the American dream, but they expect to in their lifetimes, even if the ascent is steeper right now. Latinos and African Americans are more likely than whites to say that their own economic opportunity exceeds that of their parents. And they are more than twice as likely to say that their children will have more opportunities than they did. Now, I believe, frankly, this is more emblematic of where we started than where we are today. And it's a very stark reminder that while we have made enormous progress in the United States, we still remain on the long, long road to true and genuine equality. Working class whites are already more prosperous and secure than working class minorities. In the face of economic downturn, they are less optimistic because they don't believe they're climbing anymore. And in my opinion, although the Tea Party and the Occupy movements are on the opposite ends of the political spectrum, the roots of both are linked to the economic hardship and insecurity caused by the most serious financial crisis since the Great Depression. For minorities, however, it's a slightly different story. And that's why the changing demographics of American society will also play an important role on Election Day this November, and maybe even more importantly, on election days to come. Look at Florida. According to poll results that came out, I think, at the end of last week, Governor Romney leads among Florida white voters, but that lead is erased by Florida minorities. President Obama leads by 16 points among Cuban Americans, by 36 points among non-Cuban Hispanics, and by 67 points among African Americans. So we know that the economy is the main issue in campaign 2012, but changing American demographics will play an important role in this election, and as I said, in elections to come. Add to that demographic equation the effect of immigration. Over 1 million new legal immigrants arrive in the United States every year. For decades, states like California, Illinois, Texas, New York, Florida have welcomed the majority of immigrants. But many states, cities, and neighborhoods that experienced little of any immigration over the past century are becoming new gateways. The 7 states that experienced the most rapid change over the past 20 years were North Carolina, Georgia, Arkansas, Nevada, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Nebraska. Not states you would have guessed. Certainly not states I would have guessed. In each of these states, the immigrant population in each has increased by some 200% over the past 2 decades. To varying extents, the same story is unfolding across America. Small towns and suburbs are attracting more immigrants proportionally than the traditional inner-city enclaves that dominate the ethnic landscapes and images of the past. These suburban neighborhoods are emerging as new multi-ethnic communities, and they are coming to terms with new languages, cultures, religious practices, responsibilities, and demands on resources. These developments paint part of the picture of the dramatic demographic shift that the United States as a whole is undergoing right now. So the topic today is what people know and do not know about America. Well, in view of immigration and its effect on demographics, it is almost impossible to fix a moment in time and say, this is the America that I know. America is a constantly changing reality. The fact that our system of government is complicated, as are our election procedures, I might add, doesn't make it any easier to get a handle on understanding the U.S. of A. And you might have noticed that in addition, American democracy is loud and sometimes messy. That also goes with another observation that Tocqueville made regarding America's fear of the tyranny of the majority. The framers of the Constitution did not believe in straightforward democracy. They regarded it as a short-sighted expression of popular opinion that could turn out to be at odds with the long-term public interests. Enter that wonderful invention, the Electoral College. It was essentially a compromise forged as the Constitutional Convention was trying to conclude its business in the long, hot summer of 1787. The method of selecting the president was caught up in several overlapping debates about the relative power of the federal government and the states, the power of the executive branch versus the Congress, and the sectional division between the North and the South. The Electoral College, while an instrument of democracy, has on a few occasions resulted in seemingly very undemocratic results when a president has been elected without a majority of popular votes, but with a majority of the electoral votes. The last time that happened, you may recall, was in November 2000. The election could not have been closer. It kept us all on the edge of our seats, literally for weeks, until there was final agreement on the results, and George W. Bush, then governor of Texas, was declared the winner. This year, too, on the 6th of November, 7 weeks from today, by the way, we may be up late at night or early in the morning eagerly awaiting, again, the results of individual counties, not even states, but counties in Florida or Ohio that may decide which party will receive that state's electoral votes. The Electoral College forces candidates to run, on the one hand, a national campaign, as well as regional campaigns in the so-called swing states or battleground states, which take into account the intricacies of local politics, economics, and demographics. To fuel these campaigns, it takes money, massive amounts of money. Money always plays an enormous role in American elections, in my opinion, too big a role. Each election cycle seems to bring an important new wrinkle to the political fundraising landscape. 2008 saw a revolution in small dollar contributions, largely through the internet and largely embodied by the Obama campaign. By the way, you should know that the Obama campaign, as it relates to that element of its engagement in fundraising, has broken all of its records this year that were set in 2008, particularly in terms of numbers of contributors. The new reality of this election is the Super PAC, a landmark Supreme Court ruling in 2010 in what was called, for all you lawyers out there, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. That case essentially allowed the possibility to raise unlimited but parallel campaign funds. As a result of this decision, a decision, speaking as an individual, I personally do not agree with, parallel, non-affiliated organizations can be set up to raise unlimited campaign funds. But we also know that although money is essential for a campaign, the character of the candidates and the gut values that are revealed to the voters are just as important, especially in presidential elections. To be successful, a candidate has to touch hearts and minds. The head often tends to follow wherever the heart is already moving. Tocqueville also discussed these habits of the heart in the context of American democracy. The unexpressed purpose of de Tocqueville's travels through America was to satisfy his and his countrymen's intense curiosity regarding, quote, that vast American society that everyone was talking about and no one really knew, end of quote. The formal reason for his trip, however, was an inspection tour of American prisons for the French government. In due course, in addition to Democracy in America, he also produced a lengthy report and proposals for penal reform. It is ironic that today America's system of criminal justice is seen by Europeans, perhaps rightfully so, as being overly harsh. Some people believe that this harshness is in fact the product of the very culture of rights and democracy of which Americans are so proud. What is the connection between strongly democratic politics and harsh punishment? The answer, as many scholars have argued, has to do with the simple fact that the United States, the general public, and almost every community is in favor of tough crime approaches, whether the issue is greater police presence, longer terms of imprisonment, or other measures. And since the general public has a direct voting impact on the making of criminal legislation, it is not surprising to see tougher policies than in a country like Germany and others, where specialized bureaucratic expertise exerts a more powerful and more homogenizing influence. Put simply, that means that instruments of democracy decide matters of criminal justice in America. This can, however, be a complex process because of the built-in mechanisms designed to maintain equilibrium between the states on the one hand and also between and among different parts of government. There is also almost a built-in tension between the concepts of such concepts as liberty and equality. Economic liberty, for example, may go against the principle of equality. or vice versa. The push for equality may curtail some liberties. I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that Germany and the United States share the same strong convictions about values like freedom, tolerance, and democracy. But even in the simplest discussion of freedom, there is a dichotomy among the four basic and essential human freedoms that President Franklin D. Roosevelt outlined in a very famous address to Congress in 1941. Freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of every person to worship God in his or her own way. Freedom from want. And freedom from fear. But in the United States, as I said earlier, people also feel very strongly about their own individual freedoms to make personal decisions about their lives. There is a very distinct difference between, on the one hand, a universal freedom of, or freedom from, as President Roosevelt articulated, and on the other hand, a more personal freedom to. This can affect decisions about education, health care, raising a family, religion, the right to bear arms, the wearing of veils by Muslim women, censorship. This wider definition of individual freedom also contributes to a national reality in the United States. It is a nation made up of millions of individual experiences, beliefs, and prejudices of its citizens. What images emerge from that collage, and how will they affect the upcoming election? This year, by example, we've heard much more discussion about social issues, and in particular, social issues of concern to women voters than I would have ever expected a year ago. It's been a surprise to me, I have to admit. It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next 7 weeks. I'm asked often about the role that foreign policy will play this year. The truth is that in any U.S. election, domestic issues are almost always more important to American voters. The exception was the midterm congressional election in 2002, and then the presidential election in 2004, the first two federal elections in our country after September 11th, 2001. There is no doubt, however, that given the very real tensions and challenges on the international scene, at any time during the next 7 weeks, foreign policy issues could take the forefront. The killings last week in Benghazi and the demonstrations in Arab countries may take on increasing importance in the campaign. At this point in the campaign, both parties recognize that the issue is too sensitive to politicize it. Let's hope that things calm down and that politics stay down. And so what happens next? The 3 presidential debates, which kick off, by the way, on October 3rd, and 1 vice presidential debate will be the next highlights. The conventions are over, and on the whole, I believe that both parties left their respective conventions with the feeling that they had accomplished their main goals. One of the challenges the Romney campaign faced was to offer a more personal view of their candidate. And in his acceptance speech, Governor Romney did just that. And I thought he did it well, as did his wonderful wife, Ann. For me, the highlight of the Republican convention was the speech by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. If you haven't seen it, you have to see this. She gave an excellent, and largely nonpartisan, by the way, overview of U.S. foreign policy relations and her own personal story growing up as an American. The Democratic Party had fewer distractions and skirmishes, which is to be expected with a campaign by an incumbent. It's rare that you have it within your own party when you're running for re-election. It happens. Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter would be an example in 1980, but it doesn't happen often. Each night in the Democratic convention was marked by a strong keynote speech and also strong lead-up introductory remarks. First Lady Michelle Obama once more showed an incredible presence and gave a fabulous speech. There are a number of speeches that are part of the political annals of American election campaigns. In 1964, actor Ronald Reagan gave the keynote address at the Republican convention in San Francisco. After years as a Democrat, Reagan had recently become a Republican. "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny," Reagan said in a well-received speech that launched his political career. 2 years later, he was elected governor of California, and in 1980, he was elected president. New York Governor Mario Cuomo, who I mentioned earlier, spoke at the 1984 Democratic Convention in San Francisco. The speech made Cuomo a national figure, and for years, Democrats urged him to run for president, an invitation he never accepted. The keynote speaker at the 2004 Democratic Convention in Boston, my hometown. Any members of the Red Sox Nation out there, by the way? God bless you, my son. We will cry about the season after my remarks today. So the keynote speaker at that convention in Boston spoke of the hope he believed was needed to move America forward. He said, quote, "It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs. The hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores. The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too." At the time, not many people had heard of the U.S. Senate candidate from Illinois named Barack Obama, but 4 years later he would be the name behind which the Democrats rallied at the National Convention in Denver. But a rising star is only as good as the convention speech he or she gives. And that speech is not always easy for a beginner. In 1988, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton was tapped to give the nominating speech at the Democratic Convention in Atlanta. The speech went on so long that the audience cheered when he finally got to the words, "In conclusion," he became famous overnight, but not necessarily in a good way. 4 years later, however, Clinton was nominated by his party, won the presidential election, and is now remembered, like Reagan, as one of the more effective presidential speech makers. And if you haven't seen it, the speech he gave 2 weeks ago in Charlotte proved that point. It will be added to the all-star list of great political speeches. And by the way, President Obama's speech at the same convention 2 weeks ago was also outstanding. Some say it wasn't his best. Perhaps, I say to myself, that's because he sets the bar so high. So in conclusion, and I do mean it, so please don't applaud, I think that an American election, or any election in any country for that matter, has the potential to bring out the best of what a society has to offer. Elections are all about democracy and all about ideals. Although elections are history in the making, they are also very much, and this is particularly to our young folks here, about the future. Tomorrow, I'm very honored to say the city of Berlin and the Reagan Presidential Foundation will dedicate a plaque to President Ronald Reagan at the spot where he delivered his famous challenge to General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev. In his farewell address at the end of his presidency, President Reagan said, quote, "Whatever else history may say about me when I'm gone, I hope it will record that I appealed to your best hopes, not your worst fears, to your confidence rather than your doubts." End of quote. Mögen wir das über alle amerikanischen Präsidenten und im Übrigen aber auch über alle deutschen Bundeskanzler sagen. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und jetzt zum Quiz. Through this. scotch here. Okay. If you have a particularly good answer, I want to run out in the audience and take a picture with you. You ready? Okay. As of yesterday, at 12:45 wirklich, how many people, what's the population of the United States of America?
340 million.
312.
340.
340.
3-4.
3 what?
4.
330.
3-4.
304.
310.
Who said 312? But he was sitting here, I thought. Who said, didn't you say 312? You did it. Oh, let's go. It's 314. Needless to say, it took a guy like Derek who works for an American icon like Google to get that right. Okay, so the 300, I can't do that with every question. I just had to get blow a little steam out there. 314,394,039 people lived in America as of yesterday, 12:45. I have no idea how we know that, but apparently we do. By the way, the Native American population is about 4 to 5 million of that 314 million. So when people ask about the American population, we get some American students here. Where are they? I was with them earlier. No, I wasn't with all of you. What's your name, ma'am?
Me?
Yes.
Wait, I'm not a student. I just listen to the end of the class.
But you got in under the American umbrella. Where are you from in America?
Los Angeles.
LA. So there are 4 or 5 million Native Americans. That means every single one of us, other than that 4 or 5 million, are immigrants. We have a very clear distinction as to who's Native and who's not. Okay, what state has the largest population? California. You get no pictures for that. Anybody know how big California is? I gotta speak up, folks. 65.
Bigger than the Federal Republic of Germany.
This is not bigger than the Federal Republic of Germany. That's your first hint.
37.
30. Who said 37? That was impressive as hell. Thomas, nice to see you, buddy. That was really impressive. 37,691,912. Okay, what is the largest U.S. state in terms of area? Alaska. Okay, this is interesting. Alaska is about 1/5 the size of the entire lower 48. Think about that. It has an enormous land mass and a very small population, so the density, i.e. how many persons per square mile in Alaska? 1.2 people per mile. Do you know what Germany is? Any guesses?
262. Per square kilometer.
609.
600.
Dr. Zama. 609. As smart as you are, you missed that one. Average in the United States? 87. I live in New Jersey, by the way, which is the densest state in America. Anybody here from the Garden State? Okay, just checking. Home ownership rate in the United States and Germany. Who thinks that home ownership rate in the United States is higher? You are correct. 67% in the U.S., 46% in Germany. I don't have the number here, but an even more interesting question to ask is how many of the homes in each of the two countries have a mortgage associated with the house? So this is a big deal in our economy right now because a lot of our homes are underwater. The overwhelming majority of homes in America have a mortgage associated with it. I forget the percentage, but I think it's in the 90s. The German percentage is a lot lower. So Germans, as a percentage, own fewer homes and furthermore have less debt associated either in total or per home. So when you had a real estate bubble, as we did, let's say you bought a house for $100,000, you borrowed $90,000, which you could do, by the way, at the height of the bubble. That house might be worth, in some places like Arizona today, it's getting better, by the way, or Nevada, it could be worth 60. Your mortgage is probably still worth 89, because mortgages pay off very slowly in the early years. It's a big element of what's challenging us. Okay, of the top 10 U.S. employers in 2010, how many were manufacturing firms? Eins. One. Any idea who it might be? It wasn't GE, interestingly enough. I thought that too. Hewlett Packard. Number 9, it came in at number 9 with 325,000 employees. Shall we go on? Is that all right? I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. What percentage of the American workforce is employed in the manufacturing sector, and what was that percentage in 1960? 20 is the today?
Yes, right.
10, 15, and 28.
Yeah, 15 is closer. It's 14% today. And in 1960 it was? More, 38%. 38%. Which president received the highest number in popular votes as well as the highest number of electoral votes? Ronald Reagan. 54.5 million votes and 525 electoral votes. Okay, this gets to the importance of the Electoral College. I'd say this is number 1 on the list of what we don't know about each other. It's a very complicated system, but it's really important that you understand this if you're interested in our presidential election. So what percentage of the vote in 1992 did Ross Perot get? In 1980, did John Anderson get? And in the year 2000, did Ralph Nader get? And then tell me how many electoral college votes they got.
Zero.
The answer is 0. That's the important answer. None of them got 1 electoral college vote. Perot got 18.9% of the vote. So think about this for a moment. If you were in a parliamentary democracy such as Germany, you'd be the 3rd biggest party at 18.9%. And you'd get, therefore, that level of representation. Perot, in our system, winner take all, 0 electoral votes. The footnote on Nader is that Nader pulled in, I should tell you, it's 18.9% for Perot, 6.6% for John Anderson, and 2.7% for Nader. But the key for Nader was he clocked in enough votes in Florida that it cost the Florida election for Vice President Gore. So it was a real game changer. So that's an example. Actually, Perot was as well. I don't think Anderson mattered because Reagan beat President Carter so handily. But Perot really mattered. And Nader really mattered. So it's a very odd circumstance, right? You get no electoral college votes, which is the measure by which you have to become president. And yet they literally cost the election for one of the candidates. Do you understand how the Electoral College, let me ask our German friends, if you're an American, hold off on this, but do you understand how each state's number of Electoral College votes is calculated?
Number of inhabitants?
No, it's related to that. It's indirectly related to that. It's a proxy for that. It's very simple, and it's a proxy for this. It's the number of representatives you have in the House of Representatives plus 2 for each of your 2 senators. So they'll take North Dakota, has 1 member in the House and 2 senators. They get 3 electoral college votes. Most of these states, by the way, are winner take all. There are a couple of exceptions, but they're winner take all. The one with the biggest? California. Any idea how many they've got?
43.
More? You'd have to be a student of the how many houses. They have 55 electoral votes. So 53 members of the House of Representatives. You with me on that? Plus 2 senators. The biggest change, and we had a census every 10 years, so the biggest change from 2008 to 2012 is Texas, which picked up 4. So they're now number 2 comfortably with 38 behind California. Unrelated. How many states allow gay marriage in the United States right now?
5.
Who said 8? Let's go. Got a picture. You got a red size t-shirt. Yeah. You got a red size t-shirt on. Yeah. Are you a Red Sox fan? You guys together? Yeah. Okay. Okay. The states. That one took a lot out of me, I have to say. I don't know if you heard that. I said to my buddy here, I said, how did you become a member of the Red Sox Nation? Because he's German. And he said, because I lived in Washington for 3 years. The states are Massachusetts, Connecticut, Iowa, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, Washington State, Maryland, and a bonus, the District of Columbia, which is not a state. Okay, what's the fastest growing ethnic group in the United States? It turns out, as a percentage, it's Asian Americans. Trick question. Between 2000 and 2010, by the way, 2010, you may wonder, why am I using that? It's because that's when we had a census. The growth in Asian Americans, 46%. I believe the number, I don't have the number in front of me, it's about 17 or 18 million members of our population are Asian Americans. They slightly beat out the growth in Hispanic American population, which was a 43% growth rate, so it's a trick question. But this is the killer. This is the big mega shift in demographics in our country that will define politics and society for a long time to come. In 2010, there were just over 50 million Hispanics in our country. The projection, at I'm told reasonable rates for mid-century, there will be 133 million Hispanic Americans. That is a mega game changer. And that will change, I think, politically, even places like Texas, that used to be Democratic and that have become reliably, understates it, Republican for the past 4 or 5 decades. That will come into challenge a few cycles from now. Which place in the United States votes first on Election Day?
Peaksville, Knox, New Hampshire.
Oh, where are you? Are you from there?
I'm from Connecticut.
You're close enough, man. Let's get a shot together. Come on down. What's your name?
John Flathammer.
John, how are you, buddy?
English teacher.
Oh, I love that. Are you with John?
Yes.
Krista, how are you? Where are you from? Hamburg. Okay. Okay. So here's the deal on Dixville Knox. You should know this. I grew up in Massachusetts, so this is. In Dixville Knox, the polls on Election Day are open for 1 minute, from midnight to 12:01. And the state laws in New Hampshire allow a precinct to close if all of the registered voters in the precinct have cast their ballots. So every 4 years they line up, they cast their ballots, they close.
How many?
8 or 12, something like that. Seriously.
Way up north.
You can't do this one in New York City. Dixville Knox has correctly predicted the eventual Republican nominee in the primaries every year since 1960. Think about that. Almost done. Why is the election on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November? All Saints Day. Good guess, but not the right answer. It was a good guess. I like the style.
Getting the harvest first, that's why it's in November.
Oh, I love it. That's part of it. Part of it has to do with harvest.
It's on Tuesday so that people could go to church on Sunday and then still get to the voting place.
What's your name?
Inga.
Inga, come on down. Let's go. Oh, are you related? What year? What? Is it Northampton? Northampton. Okay. This is also a good chance for me to get caught up with some old friends here. I apologize for taking your time to do that, but you got that exactly right. Okay, just a quick comment about turnout, which is really something that Germany battles, by the way, as well. You got to be careful. To the young people here, you've got to vote. The least reliable block of voters in any open and free democracy where there's not a required voting are young people. You've got to get in the habit of voting. It's like brushing your teeth at night. You got to just do it. Seriously. Older folks tend to turn out a lot higher levels. So since 1984, let me just read you the turnout every 4 years in our country. And I'm going to round this up. 84, 53%. 88, 50. 92, 55. 96, 49%. 2000, 51. 2004, 55. 2008, 57. Now the good news is 2008 was up. I hope we do better this time. But that's not acceptable. Those numbers are not acceptable. And Germany's federal election in September of 2009 was, I think, 4 points lower than September of 2005. Those are trends that we all together have to push back on. Lastly, when do Americans sing at sporting events? Not all the time. That's the answer in Germany. We sing the national anthem before every game.
You sing the national anthem at the beginning.
At the beginning?
Yeah.
Not during the game.
Before.
No. The difference is, when I would go to football games all the time, I was at Fürth, Schalke the other night, and then Hertha Allen. Anyone at the Hertha Allen game? Didn't think so. They're singing for the entire game. In America, you sing before the game, and then you don't sing again. Think about that. Last question. HSV or St. Pauli? Raise your hands for HSV. Any St. Pauli fans out there? Very impressive. Very impressive. Okay, that's it. Let's take some questions. Thank you very much.